This is a story involving twin sisters, an absolute mental breakdown, an insane traffic accident recorded by a TV station, and a crime. Sisters Sabina and Ursula Eriksson experienced something that experts call folie à deux, which is a term used for psychosis and shared delusions. A syndrome that passes delusional beliefs from one person to another, often close loved ones, sometimes several people. But what makes someone's brain so powerful that they share their psychosis with someone else? That's what we're going to find out in today's video. During my research to write the script for this video, I couldn't find much information about the childhood and adolescence of the two sisters. What is known is that identical twins, Sabina and Ursula Eriksson, were born on November 3rd, 1976, in Sweden. And everything I found basically says that they seem to have had a normal lives until adulthood. In the year 2000, aged 24, Ursula moved to the United States, and around the same time, Sabina got married, had 2 children, and lived with her family in County Cork, a county in the province of Munster, Ireland. By all accounts of the case, there didn't seem to be anything in the sisters' story that could predict what was to come. They were no drug users, had never been in trouble with the law, and also had no family history of mental health problems. In May 2008, Ursula traveled to Ireland to visit her sister. Although this visit only lasted 24 hours, Sabina's husband noticed how close the two sisters were and spent practically the entire day together. But the next morning, they decided to go on a trip after Sabina had a little argument with her husband. The two took a ferry boat to Liverpool, and Sabina left the children at home. It's unclear if her husband knew about this trip or why they decided to go to the UK, but Irish police haven't received a missing persons report for either of the sisters, so we can assume they didn't sneak out and may even have reported where they were going. When they arrived in Liverpool, Ursula and Sabina went straight to the police station located on St. Anne. They wanted to file a complaint regarding Sabina's children, saying that they were with their husband and could be in danger. During this denunciation, it was not very clear what kind of danger this would be. The two were talking quietly to each other, and the police found it strange that they had traveled to make a report instead of doing it in Ireland. Nevertheless, the officer in charge contacted Dublin Police Station. In Ireland, police officers went to Sabina's house to check on her children's safety, and within minutes they returned after confirming that everything was normal. Until this point, despite the strange behavior of the sisters, no one suspected anything. The two left the police station and bought bus tickets towards London, capital of England. They boarded around 11:30 a.m. and, according to the bus driver, started to acting very strangely. They refused to put their bags in the trunk of the bus. The driver asked why, and they didn't say anything, so the man said he needed to see what they were carrying, but they again refused. Even so, the driver authorized them to enter. When they sat down, they continued to act strangely. They stood tightly clutching their suitcases, as if they were afraid someone would steal them. Halfway there, the bus stopped at a service station close to a motorway known as the M6 in Staffordshire. The sisters got off the bus because they said they weren't feeling well, and the driver took the opportunity to say that they couldn't continue the trip because if something went wrong, the company would blame him for not searching the luggage. An employee working at the service station also noticed that they were acting strangely and decided to call the police, afraid that they were dangerous and intended to hurt people. When the police arrived, the officers spoke to the sisters, but saw that they posed no threat, so they let them go. It is not clear from the source whether they let the police search their luggage or not. The two decided to walk towards the M6 highway and walk through the median. However, it was a very dangerous route for pedestrians, as vehicles passed very close to one side. In a short time, the two drew a lot of attention, especially when they tried to cross to the other side of the track. People concerned about the women's safety called the police, and it wasn't long before a police car showed up at the scene. The strangest thing about this story is that at the same time that the police arrived, a film crew from BBC program also arrived and started recording the bizarre scene. By coincidence or not, they witnessed the chaos the sisters were about to commit. At first, everything seemed quiet and calm when the traffic police approached the twins on the side of the road. They tried to say that this was not a safe place for them to walk, as it was a very busy road. The two stood listening to the policeman and they smoked a cigarette. Another vehicle arrived at the scene with more officers, and as they became aware of the situation, suddenly, something shocking happened. Ursula simply runs towards the cars. A policeman still manages to grab her by the jacket to try to hold her, but she manages to break free and run straight in front of a large truck, getting run over. All of this is captured by the film crew, and the scene is very disturbing. No one would be able to survive after being hit head-on by such a large truck at 90 km per hour. The police are shocked by what just happened, but they don't have a second to process it. Because right after that, Sabina runs out onto the road and throws herself on top of a car. The police rush to help them. Ursula had her legs completely crushed, but surprisingly she was alive. She was in shock and started screaming desperately. She tried to get up, probably not noticing the state of her legs. So the police went to calm her down and keep her on the ground while the ambulance was called. But Ursula kept screaming, hitting and spitting on anyone who got close to her. Meanwhile, another police officer tried to help Sabina, who was crashed into the windshield of a smaller car. She was unconscious for about 15 minutes, and when she woke up, she also had an attack of hysteria. She tried to get up, and as the officer held her, Sabina slapped him and started screaming, saying, "I recognize you, you are not real." She kept screaming and said that someone was trying to steal her organs and other things that didn't make any sense. Then, as if nothing had happened, she just got up and ran. The policeman chased her as she screamed for help, asking someone to call the police, not realizing that the police were already there trying to help her. At this point, the police began to think that the twins were under the influence of some hallucinogenic substance. They were delirious. They didn't understand the seriousness of their injuries, and they said they were seeing things that didn't exist, and more. The two had superhuman strength, and none of the police could stop them. Sabina kept running as if nothing had happened, and when a police officer tried to subdue her, she punched him in the face. It took 6 people to finally catch her and handcuff her so they could drive her to the hospital. Even surrendered, Sabina didn't stop attacking, struggling, kicking, and throwing punches. But finally Ursula, who had more serious injuries, was transported by helicopter to the hospital, while her sister was taken away in an ambulance. As they were taken away, the police officers who stayed at the scene looked for clues that could explain the insane events they had just witnessed. But all they found were 2 broken cell phones and the twins' luggage. The police probably thought they would find some kind of hallucinogenic substance, but inside the bags there was nothing unusual or suspicious. At the hospital, due to her serious injuries, Ursula was admitted to undergo surgery. It was a miracle that she was alive. Sabina was examined and released into police custody about 5 hours later. The doctors and nurses who treated them said they seemed calm as they were laughing and joking. When Sabina arrived at the police station to be booked, the officers noticed that she was talking, smiling, and flirting with an officer. At no point did she ask about her sister Ursula. Sabina only spent 1 night in jail, and the next day she was taken to a court hearing, where she pleaded guilty to charges of punching a police officer and trespassing on the road, being sentenced to just 1 day in jail, as she had already spent night in jail police station. Just like that, without any psychiatric evaluation or any other care. After being released, Sabina wandered the streets of England with about 1,300 euros and a laptop, nothing else. Around 7 p.m., she encountered 2 men who were walking a dog, Glenn Hollinshead and Peter Malloy. The woman approached the men and asked if they knew any hotels that served free breakfast. Glenn, who was a paramedic, noticed that she was badly hurt and took pity on the woman, offered to change her bandages, and told her she could sleep in his apartment that night. Sabina agreed and the 3 of them left together. In the apartment, the woman began to exhibit strange behavior again. She kept peeking out the window as if someone was watching or following her. She also offered the two men cigarettes, but then snatched them out of her mouth saying they were poisonous, then smoked them herself. A little before midnight, Peter said he needed to sleep and went back to his house, leaving Glenn and Sabina alone. At no time did the two men seem to have noticed that Sabina was having some kind of mental confusion. After all, it wasn't normal for a woman to accept help from two strangers in the middle of the street and still sleep in one of their houses. Despite this, all the articles that talk about Glenn said that his friends and family reported he was just a very kind person and ready to help anyone in need, with no ulterior motives. The night went by without any problems. Sabina seemed calmer and more relaxed. So around 7:40 p.m. the next day, Glenn asks her to stay a little longer so that he could cook dinner. While making the food, Glenn notices that he runs out of tea, so he knocks on the door of the neighbor, a man named Frank, and asks if he can borrow some tea. Glenn goes back into the kitchen, and a few minutes later he comes out again, this time staggering and bleeding profusely. But he still manages to knock on the neighbor's door for help. Frank sees him seriously injured and asks what happened, and Glenn just says he was attacked by the woman who was in his apartment, and asks Frank to take care of his dog. A few minutes later, Glenn succumbs to his injuries and dies right there on the spot. He had been attacked 5 times by Sabina, who used a meal weapon she took from the kitchen. Frank called the police, but Sabina ran out of the apartment with a hammer in her hand. As she ran around screaming wildly, she used the hammer to hit her own head. On the street, a passerby saw her and tried to grab her, but she kept running completely out of control. When police and paramedics arrive at Glenn's home, some officers go looking for the woman and discover that she had fallen from a 12-meter bridge, with several fractures on her body. Taken to the hospital, doctors ran tests to see the amount of alcohol or any other substance in her blood, but tests showed that her system was completely clear. She wasn't under the influence of anything when she attacked Glenn, injured herself with a hammer, and fell off a bridge. Sabina was arrested for the crime against Glenn on June 6, 2008. But as she was still recovering in hospital for her injuries, she was not taken into custody until a week later, arriving at the penitentiary in a wheelchair. It was at this time that her sister Ursula was also being released from the hospital. The woman was deported back to Sweden and then transferred back to the United States, where she had a permanent residence. Ursula was never tried for any crime and decided to seek help in religion, where she became a very active member until today. Meanwhile, Sabina's trial was postponed because courts had difficulty obtaining her medical records in Sweden. Finally, in September 2009, she pleaded guilty to the crime against Glenn, but said she didn't mean to do what she did. Both the prosecution and the woman's defense team claimed that she was mentally insane when she committed the crime, and a very interesting theory was put forward. The defense alleged that Sabina suffered from something called folie à deux, which means two-way madness or shared madness, which is basically a shared psychosis where one person's delusional beliefs are passed on to another. They said that it was Ursula who really suffered from psychosis, but as the two were very close, they shared the same period of insanity. It's quite an interesting theory. Two people can be so connected that they can even share the same madness. Sabina was sentenced to 5 years in prison. However, she was released the following year in 2011 after spending just 439 days in jail. She never gave any explanation for her behavior or tried to justify the reasons for the crime, and when she was released from prison, she simply disappeared from the map. Glenn's brother spoke about the case to a newspaper saying, "We don't hold Sabina responsible, just as we would blame a rabid dog for biting someone. She was sick and not responsible for her actions. Her mental disorder should have been recognized earlier. So I question the criminal justice system for allowing someone in that state to be released. Her mental condition should have been properly evaluated after what she did on the highway and the experiences the police had. Her mental disorder should have been diagnosed before she was released into the community. It wasn't Sabina who took my brother's life. It was the state that failed once again." This case is really very strange and make us wonder how all this could have happened. How did two seemingly normal women put off all this? Do you believe the idea of shared madness? Is there really a psychosis that can be shared? Leave your opinion here in the comments. Well folks, that's it for today. Thanks for watching until the end, best wishes, and I see you next time.